The courtroom fell silent as Steven Seagal stood and prepared to speak. The sunlight poured through the large windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. It was a typical daytime session, but the air felt unusually heavy, charged with anticipation. Lawyers and spectators alike paused mid-motion, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Even the court reporter, fingers hovering over the keyboard, seemed to hold her breath. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his calm demeanor and steady voice, shifted in his seat. He tried to stay composed, adjusting his robe and clearing his throat, but there was a subtle tension in his shoulders. The room was filled with a quiet hum of whispered conversations, yet no one dared break the silence. Every eye was fixed on Seagal, who stood with a calm, unwavering presence. His expression was serene, almost meditative, yet his gaze carried the weight of someone who had seen injustice and chose to speak truth without fear. Seagal's voice, when it came, was measured but firm, slicing through the ambient tension like a blade. The words were not loud or angry. There was no need for theatrics. Each sentence resonated with clarity and sincerity, and slowly, the murmurs in the room faded into complete silence. Even the most skeptical onlookers leaned forward, drawn in by the authority and authenticity in his tone. The case at hand had already been tense, with emotions running high on both sides. Powerful figures in the room had attempted to sway opinions, believing that influence and intimidation could dominate truth. But Seagal's presence, combined with his unshakable calm, shifted the energy entirely. His words highlighted the human element at the heart of the case, the real people affected by decisions made far above their heads. Judge Caprio's eyes began to glisten, a rare crack in his composed exterior. He tried to maintain his usual professional detachment, but the message Seagal delivered struck a chord deeper than courtroom procedure. A few spectators dabbed at their eyes discreetly, and even some of the lawyers paused mid-note, captivated and unsettled at once. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The usual rhythm of gavel taps, shuffled papers, and hushed conversations vanished. What Steven Seagal said next would not only change the atmosphere of the courtroom but also leave an imprint on everyone present. Even the toughest, most experienced members of the legal world found themselves holding back tears. It was a bright Tuesday morning in the downtown courthouse. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the polished wooden benches and the glossy tiled floors. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, yet there was an unusual energy in the air, an almost tangible tension that made the ordinary courtroom feel charged. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered instructions to their assistants, and occasionally glanced up at the spectators. The murmur of conversations filled the room like a low hum, punctuated by the soft tapping of shoes against the floor and the rustle of legal pads. On this particular day, it seemed like any other, yet everyone sensed something was different. The usual routine of motions, objections, and the dull cadence of legal proceedings felt strangely suspended. The courtroom doors opened quietly, and in walked Steven Seagal. He was calm, deliberate, and unassuming. No bodyguards flanked him. There was no flashing of cameras, no fanfare. Just a simple suit, pressed but understated, and a steady, confident gait. His presence did not scream for attention, yet it demanded it. People instinctively turned to look, drawn by a quiet authority that seemed to fill the room without effort. He moved through the aisle slowly, deliberately, his eyes scanning the room but not in search of anyone in particular. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no hint of impatience. Every step was measured, every motion calm, yet it carried the weight of someone who had faced challenges far beyond this courtroom and remained undeterred. The spectators instinctively straightened in their seats, some leaning forward to get a clearer view. Whispers began to spread. "Is that Steven Seagal?" "It is him. He's here." Lawyers paused mid-motion, uncertain whether to continue their preparations or simply watch. Seagal reached the podium, adjusted the microphone with a quiet hand, and the room fell into an unexpected stillness. The usual background noise of flipping papers, murmured conversations, and the distant clicking of the stenographer's keyboard disappeared almost instantly. It was as if the room itself acknowledged the presence of someone who demanded attention simply by being there. People exchanged glances, a subtle nod of recognition passing between those who had seen him on screens or read about him in headlines. There was curiosity, yes, but also a growing sense of anticipation, a feeling that whatever he was about to say would matter deeply. He looked around the courtroom once, his eyes calm and unwavering. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet focus. The judge, the lawyers, the spectators, all felt the subtle gravity of the moment. Even the seasoned members of the courtroom, accustomed to high-profile cases and dramatic testimonies, seemed to pause and take note. Seagal's calm authority was palpable, almost magnetic. He did not need to assert dominance or demand respect. It came naturally, simply because he embodied it. Before we continue, take a moment to think and tell me in the comments, who would you want to hear speak in court if you had the chance? Would it be someone fearless, someone wise, or someone who could make the room stop with their presence alone? Because in moments like these, it's not just the words that matter. It's the energy behind them, the weight of experience and quiet confidence that makes people listen. Seagal placed a single hand on the podium and straightened his posture. His movements were calm, precise, and deliberate. The air in the courtroom seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, like a breeze brushing through still air. Every individual in the room felt it, the quiet authority, the sense that the next few minutes would be different from any other proceedings. The lawyers whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that mixed curiosity, respect, and a hint of unease. Spectators craned their necks, leaning forward slightly as if gravity itself had pulled them toward the podium. Phones appeared in hands, cameras discreetly raised, yet there was an understanding. This was not a moment to disrupt, only to witness. Even Judge Caprio, known for his composure and steady demeanor, shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his robe as if preparing for the weight of the moment. Seagal's calm, measured presence had already made an impact. Without speaking a single word yet, he had captured the attention of everyone in the room. And in that quiet, sunlit courtroom, it became clear that this was not just another case. This was a moment where respect, authority, and truth would converge in a way no one present would ever forget. The case before the courtroom that day was not an ordinary one. It involved a series of injustices that had plagued the local community for years, small violations that were easily ignored but left real people suffering. Families had been silenced, voices dismissed, and yet the powerful figures behind these injustices believed they could manipulate the law without consequence. They walked the courtroom with an air of confidence, smug smiles barely hiding the sense of entitlement that had carried them for decades. Lawyers representing these figures shuffled papers, whispering strategies and trying to anticipate every possible challenge, convinced that authority and money would outweigh truth and justice. Into this tense atmosphere stepped Steven Seagal, calm and composed, like a sudden eye of a storm. His presence alone altered the energy in the room. He did not raise his voice or demand attention. There was no dramatic entrance, no aggressive assertion. Instead, he carried a quiet authority that made every individual present pay attention, every whisper fall silent. He had learned long ago that true influence did not need theatrics. It simply needed truth delivered with clarity and conviction. As he began speaking, the courtroom listened. His words were measured, deliberate, and precise. Each sentence carried weight without being confrontational. He recounted the events as they had unfolded, focusing not on anger or revenge but on facts and the experiences of those who had suffered. The victims' voices, long ignored, were amplified by his calm but powerful narration. He described the small injustices, the subtle manipulations, the moments when those in power had dismissed the pleas of ordinary people. Every detail was presented with clarity, leaving no room for misunderstanding. What made his words so compelling was not just what he said, but how he said it. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not lash out. His tone was even, his gestures measured, yet every word resonated deeply. The room, previously filled with murmurs of doubt and smug confidence, grew still. Even the lawyers representing the powerful figures felt the tension shift. Their eyes flickered nervously, glances exchanged as they realized the calm authority of this man could not be intimidated. The victims, seated quietly in the gallery, felt a sense of validation they had not experienced before. For years, they had been overlooked, dismissed, and belittled. Now, someone stood for them, articulating their struggle with clarity and unwavering focus. Each detail Seagal recounted reminded the courtroom that these were real lives, real consequences, not just abstract legal disputes. His words held a moral weight that no lawyer's argument or fancy rhetoric could match. Even Judge Caprio, experienced in handling countless dramatic courtroom moments, found himself leaning forward, eyes intent, absorbing every word. The judge's usual calm was tested not by theatrics but by the undeniable truth that Seagal presented. The energy in the room shifted completely. The arrogance and complacency of the powerful figures began to crumble under the quiet but unyielding force of honesty. As Steven continued, the courtroom began to understand that this case was more than a legal battle. It was a test of integrity, a moment where respect for truth would define the outcome. He articulated the principles at stake, emphasizing the human consequences over procedural technicalities. Each sentence was like a spotlight, illuminating the gaps between the claims of those in power and the reality experienced by the victims. By the time he finished recounting the events, a profound silence had settled over the room. No one moved, no one whispered, and the weight of his words hung in the air. The powerful figures, confident just moments ago, now shifted uneasily in their seats. The victims, for the first time, felt seen and heard. The courtroom had transformed from a theater of intimidation into a chamber of truth, and at the center stood Steven Seagal, calm, unwavering, and undeniably influential simply through the power of his words. Steven Seagal's words echoed through the sunlit courtroom. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the bench, his eyes wide and focused. For a moment, it seemed as though he could barely process the calm authority in the room. The courtroom, usually a controlled arena of procedure and formalities, had shifted into something far more profound. The energy was palpable. The quiet but undeniable force of truth had entered the room, and no one could ignore it. Spectators, who had initially come expecting a routine legal proceeding, began to react in subtle but significant ways. Some gasped quietly, almost involuntarily, as they realized the courage it took for a single individual to speak so plainly and with such purpose. Others dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs or tissues, quietly moved by the weight of the story being told. The emotion was not manufactured or dramatic. It was genuine, a reflection of the injustice they had all sensed but had rarely seen articulated with such clarity and calm. Even the opposing lawyer, a man usually confident and unshakable, paused mid-note. Pen in hand, he seemed momentarily frozen, aware that the usual tactics of intimidation and rhetoric were no match for the quiet but piercing force of truth. He looked across the courtroom, catching the eyes of witnesses and staff alike, and noticed the subtle nods, the restrained but visible acknowledgement of the impact of Seagal's words. The room had changed, and he, too, could not escape its gravity. The victims, seated together on one side of the courtroom, shifted in their chairs, some leaning forward, some exhaling softly, as if the weight of years of frustration and fear were being lifted, if only slightly. They whispered among themselves, softly, almost in disbelief, sharing glances of hope and validation. For them, this was not just a legal battle. It was a moment of recognition, a rare acknowledgement that their voices mattered and their experiences were being seen. Judge Caprio's usual composure began to crack ever so slightly. His hands tightened around the edges of the bench, and a flicker of emotion passed across his face. He was a man who had witnessed countless cases, moments of drama, desperation, and anger, yet there was something different here. The power in the courtroom had shifted away from the usual authorities, the lawyers, the powerful figures, and toward someone who wielded influence through honesty, humility, and calm courage. The judge inhaled slowly, his voice caught between professionalism and emotion, knowing that this testimony was extraordinary in its quiet force. Even the staff, the clerks, and court attendants felt it. They exchanged small, almost imperceptible glances, a recognition that the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. No one laughed, no one whispered disrespectfully. Instead, there was a pervasive sense of reverence, an acknowledgement that true respect and integrity had entered the room. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to accentuate the shift, highlighting the faces of those moved, emphasizing the contrasts between arrogance and humility, power and conscience. In the gallery, students and young observers, there to witness the proceedings for educational purposes, sat forward in their seats. Some furrowed their brows in concentration, others whispered quietly, as if trying to capture the lessons unfolding before them. They understood instinctively that this moment was about more than just law. It was about the impact one person could have when they spoke with clarity and truth, even in the face of intimidation. By the time Seagal paused, the courtroom had transformed. The initial tension, the sense of formality and detachment, had dissolved into a charged silence filled with emotion and reflection. Respect and honesty were winning, quietly but powerfully, over arrogance, lies, and manipulation. Even those who had entered with skepticism could not deny it. Every eye in the room, from the judge to the quietest spectator, felt the weight of what had been said and the force of the presence delivering it. It was a rare moment where the court, a space defined by rules and procedure, became a stage for moral clarity. The room was alive with unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary had occurred. And in that stillness, it was clear, words spoken with integrity and delivered with calm authority could move people more than any argument, threat, or display of power ever could. After finishing, Steven Seagal sat down quietly, his posture calm and unassuming. The courtroom, previously charged with tension and whispered speculation, seemed to hold its breath. Every individual present was processing what had just transpired. It was as if time had slowed, each second stretching longer than usual, giving everyone a moment to reflect on the power of words delivered with quiet authority. Judge Frank Caprio, who had tried to maintain his composure throughout the proceedings, now spoke with an unusual tremor in his voice. The courtroom had been transformed by the weight of truth, and even the judge, known for his steadiness and professionalism, could not hide the emotion that laced his tone. "Your words remind us why justice must always come from the heart," he said, his voice cracking slightly, carrying sincerity that resonated through the room. For a moment, silence returned, a brief pause that allowed the impact of his words to sink in fully. Before we continue, take a moment to reflect and comment below. Have you ever seen someone speak and change a room instantly? Thought balloon. Think about the last time you were in the presence of someone whose words commanded attention, not through volume or force, but through truth and calm confidence. That is the kind of power Steven Seagal displayed in this courtroom. The spectators began to stir, first subtly, then more visibly. A low murmur ran through the gallery, and then a ripple of applause started, growing steadily until the room was filled with the sound of hands clapping. Some people stood, unable to contain their respect and admiration for what they had witnessed. Others wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the combination of honesty, humility, and moral courage on display. It was a reaction not born of celebrity or spectacle, but of the undeniable impact of someone speaking truth in a place where truth often felt rare. Even the attorneys, some of whom had initially been skeptical or dismissive, looked on with a mixture of surprise and respect. Their expressions softened as they realized that the courtroom, for once, was no longer just a battleground of strategy and influence. It had become a place where integrity and clarity held sway. Whispers began to ripple through the room. "Did you hear how he said that? I can't believe how calm he was. That was powerful without even raising his voice." Each comment underscored the lesson that had quietly unfolded. Authority and respect were not granted by position or intimidation, but earned through honesty and measured action. Judge Caprio allowed the applause to continue for a few moments, his eyes glistening as he glanced around the room. The combination of sunlight streaming through the windows and the human response below created a moment that felt almost cinematic. He adjusted his robe, cleared his throat, and then addressed the room again, this time with a steadier voice, but no less heartfelt. "Let this serve as a reminder to all of us," he said, "that the measure of justice is not how loudly one can speak or how forcefully one can act. True justice arises from clarity, fairness, and the courage to uphold what is right, even when it is difficult." By now, the entire courtroom was alive with discussion, yet there was no chaos. It was the kind of controlled energy that comes when people have witnessed something meaningful, something that resonates deeply. Spectators whispered to one another about the unexpected lesson in humility and strength, noting how one simple voice, delivered with conviction and calm, could turn the tide of a room filled with years of tension and entrenched authority. For the victims and attendants, the impact was profound. They felt a renewed sense of hope and validation. For the legal professionals present, it was a reminder that their work, at its best, was not about winning arguments or asserting dominance, but about serving the principles of justice. And for the rest of the observers, it was a rare chance to see influence expressed not through volume or intimidation, but through composure, clarity, and integrity. The courtroom had changed that day. A single calm voice had reminded everyone present why honesty, courage, and humility matter more than position or power. And in that quiet yet powerful moment, it was clear, the ripple of influence that truth can create is far stronger than any display of force or authority. The courtroom settled into a quiet anticipation as the verdict was announced. The judge's gavel echoed lightly, yet it carried the weight of months of investigation, preparation, and the profound moments that had just unfolded. It was a verdict unlike any the community had seen in recent memory. Fair, compassionate, and rooted deeply in justice. The decisions honored not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of equity, giving the victims a sense of recognition that many had long been denied. Families who had felt invisible, silenced, or overlooked finally felt seen. Their struggles had been acknowledged in the most official, formal, and human way possible. Steven Seagal sat quietly, observing the courtroom without any hint of ego or triumph. He had not sought applause or validation. His presence had been deliberate, calm, and understated. And yet, despite leaving the room without fanfare, his impact lingered in every corner of the courtroom. Lawyers, clerks, and spectators alike glanced at one another, exchanging subtle nods that reflected a shared understanding. Something rare had occurred here, something that transcended the typical proceedings of law. His words had shifted the tone of the room, and now, as the judgment was finalized, that influence remained palpable. Victims approached the bench with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and disbelief. Some spoke softly, thanking the judge, the legal team, and even Seagal himself. Their voices trembled with emotion, a reflection of years of frustration and hope that had finally been validated. They recounted the ways in which their lives had been affected by the injustices, and for the first time, their stories were met with not just procedural acknowledgement but genuine empathy. It was a moment of catharsis, a recognition that the legal system, when guided by fairness and courage, could indeed serve those it was meant to protect. Judge Caprio remained at his bench, his composure tempered by the visible emotion on his face. He looked out over the courtroom, taking in the reactions of every individual present. The judge's usual authoritative calm had softened into a quiet reflection, a reminder to all in attendance that humility and truth matter far more than power or position. His gaze lingered on Seagal briefly, acknowledging the quiet force that had helped bring about this moment. Though the actor had no formal role in the verdict, his presence had underscored the principles of fairness, courage, and moral clarity in a way that few could ignore. Even the opposing counsel, who had initially arrived confident in their strategy, seemed to recognize the significance of what had transpired. There were no bitter exchanges, no attempts to diminish the outcome. Instead, there was an unspoken respect for the integrity displayed by the victims, by the legal team, and by the quiet, commanding presence of Seagal. The room, once filled with tension and skepticism, now radiated an energy of acknowledgement and understanding. As people began to depart, conversations shifted from the procedural details of the case to the lessons embedded in the day's events. Observers discussed how influence need not be loud or forceful, how leadership and authority could manifest through calm conviction and integrity. For students and young attendees, this was an unforgettable lesson in character, demonstrating that respect, truth, and humility could create change far more effectively than intimidation or aggression. Steven Seagal rose quietly and walked toward the exit. He did not linger for applause or photographs. He left as he had arrived, understated, composed, and yet indelibly impactful. Every step he took seemed to leave a subtle imprint on the courtroom, a reminder that influence is often quiet, yet enduring. Judge Caprio, remaining at his bench as the courtroom emptied, glanced once more around the room. His eyes reflected a mixture of pride, gratitude, and solemnity. He knew that the day had been about more than just a legal outcome. It had been a demonstration of the transformative power of truth and integrity. The courtroom, its staff, its lawyers, its victims, and its spectators had all borne witness to a moment that would not soon be forgotten. In that quiet resolution, the lesson was clear. Real power does not need to assert itself loudly. True impact comes from standing with conviction, speaking truth, and remaining humble, even when no one is watching. And in this courtroom, on this bright day, those lessons had been delivered with remarkable clarity, leaving an enduring mark on everyone present. As the courtroom emptied and the sunlight continued to stream through the tall windows, a profound lesson lingered in the air. Beyond the legal proceedings, beyond the verdict, there was a deeper truth that had revealed itself, one that transcended the specifics of the case or the drama of the courtroom. Real strength is not measured by wealth, influence, or position. Real strength is using your voice to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to speak for those whose words have been ignored, and to act when others are silent. It is a quiet, persistent force that shapes outcomes in ways no display of arrogance or power ever could. Steven Seagal's presence that day exemplified this principle. He did not command the room with theatrics or intimidation. He did not rely on fame, recognition, or threats. His influence was subtle yet undeniable. Every word he spoke, every calm gesture, conveyed a level of authority rooted not in ego, but in integrity and clarity. It was a reminder to everyone present, judges, lawyers, clerks, spectators, and victims alike, that the most powerful actions often come without fanfare. True influence is quiet, measured, and deliberate, but its effect can ripple far beyond the moment in which it is displayed. Respect and courage, as the day demonstrated, speak louder than status or money. The courtroom had been filled with individuals accustomed to relying on authority, intimidation, or financial leverage to assert control. Yet none of these tools could match the quiet force of honesty combined with moral courage. The victims, long overlooked and dismissed, had finally seen their struggles acknowledged. They had witnessed that integrity, even when expressed simply, could change the course of events, restore faith, and deliver justice in ways that power alone never could. Judge Frank Caprio, still seated at his bench, embodied the quiet reflection that the day demanded. His eyes held a mixture of emotion and admiration for the lessons unfolding before him. He had witnessed countless moments of triumph and failure in his career, yet this day stood apart. The courtroom, normally defined by procedure and formality, had become a place of moral clarity. Everyone present had been reminded that fairness, humility, and respect are principles that matter above all else. For the audience watching or learning about this story, the message is equally clear. True courage is not loud or aggressive. It does not demand attention through spectacle. It is expressed through calm, deliberate action, through the choice to uphold what is right even when no one is watching. Standing for truth, speaking for the vulnerable, and acting with integrity are the measures of real power. These are qualities that endure far beyond any single courtroom, any one verdict, or any fleeting moment of recognition. Type courage in the comments if you believe that standing for truth is real power. Share your location or city as well. I want to honor everyone who values justice, empathy, and integrity in their daily lives. Because this story is not just about one courtroom or one individual. It is about the universal truth that each of us has the potential to influence the world positively, quietly, and meaningfully. As the sun dipped slightly in the sky, casting long golden beams across the benches and walls, it was clear that the lessons of that day would endure. Young students, spectators, legal professionals, and even those who had arrived skeptical all carried away a piece of what had happened. They had seen a demonstration of calm authority, moral courage, and the transformative power of speaking truth with conviction. It was a reminder that no position, wealth, or reputation can replace the quiet, steadfast impact of integrity and action. In every courtroom, office, classroom, or public space, the same principle holds. Real strength is often silent, but it is never invisible. Respect and courage, exercised consistently and authentically, leave marks that endure. They shape decisions, inspire others, and transform environments in ways that few realize until they witness it. The story of that courtroom, of Steven Seagal's calm yet commanding presence, of Judge Caprio's emotional response, and of the victims finally being heard, is a testament to the enduring power of truth, integrity, and moral courage. So carry that lesson forward. Speak when it matters. Stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. Respect those around you regardless of their status. Courage, humility, and honesty are the quiet forces that truly shape the world. And as you reflect on this story, remember, even the smallest voice, expressed with conviction and care, can change the tide of any room, any moment, and ultimately, any life.